Hello, and welcome to episode 0 of the cavnessHR podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. In this episode, I will introduce myself to you and provide you some of my background. I will also talk about the intent and the vision for the cavnessHR podcast. On the cavnessHR podcast, we'll be talking to small business owners, founders, and people in the tech, startup, and HR spaces. Once in a blue moon, we'll also talk to people outside of these areas, especially if I believe they will bring additional value to you, the listener. I want to emphasize that this podcast is for you, the listener. I believe we have a great set of people on tap to interview and that they would be bringing lots of value to us. Like all of you, I've had my share of success and failures. I was born and raised in the great state of Texas, and although I've not lived there since 1999, I still consider myself a Texan. After high school, I joined the Army, where I served at Gibraltar, Germany, and Fort Jackson, South Carolina. After leaving the Army, I went to school in Odessa College in Odessa, Texas. I then transferred and graduated to the University of Texas at the Permian Basin, UTPB, also located in Odessa, Texas. While there, I was elected Student Senate President my senior year. My big accomplishment as president of UTPB during my senior year was I was able to start the process to bring dormitories and apartments to the UTP campus for student living. After I graduated at UTPB, I once again joined the Army, where after a couple of years, I became an officer by attending Officer Candidate School. The Army sent myself and my family to several places, to include Wiesbaden in Germany, Vicenza, Italy, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Seoul, Korea, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and Fort Lewis, Washington. We were able to travel to many countries during this time. Also during this time, I earned my Master's in Human Relations from the University of Oklahoma. During the time period of me getting ready to retire from the Army, a Mark Monroe reached out to me. He wanted to know how the Army prepared people when they left the Army. He wanted to know this information, help him with a startup, Mine Unfold. I was like, what is a startup? So we met, and I explained how the Army prepares people to leave, and Mark explained to me how startups work. During the conversation, I asked Mark, who's doing HR? He said, no one. I asked him to let me set up his HR and do other things for Mine Unfold. I could be another person who could help out. I can learn more about startups. He said that would be interesting and to let him think about it. Well, I started sending him HR product and going to Mine Unfold meetings. So I pretty much hired myself. I like to say that I did everything from Mine Unfold except design a code. I learned quite a bit with Mine Unfold, especially from the other members of Mine Unfold. Enough to learn that I love the startup world and all the endless possibilities. I also learned that most startups don't have HR, or in that case, most small businesses do not have HR. Despite a great team and a great idea, like most startups, Mine Unfold did not make it. It was during this time that I began to think if providing HR to companies with less than 50 people might be a good business to start. So during the year 2016, I talked to 331 founders and small business owners about this concept. And the results were very encouraging, as 71% said my business idea was viable. So I've been working on cavnessHR since June 2016. Although I made some great progress, I still have a long way to go. During this time, I've done lots of networking and met some great people in the small business, tech, startup, and HR worlds. I was trying to figure out a way to give value to all these great communities. I thought, why not start a podcast where you talk to people in these areas and how to provide value? So that is where my idea for this podcast came. I believe you, the listener, will receive some great value from the people who are scheduled to talk to us. We have people lined up from all over the US, from Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, and South Africa. We will be hearing from many different perspectives, and I believe the more perspective we provide you, the listener, the more value you will receive. I'll be asking each person the following questions. Tell us about a time you were successful, and what did you learn, and what can our listeners learn from this? Tell us about a time you were a failure, what you learned from this failure and what our listeners can learn from this. How do you add value and help to solve problems? Tell us about someone who's helped you in the past and how they helped you. Tell us something about yourself that most people don't know. There will, of course, be more questions that come from the natural conversation, but these are the ones I will ask each person. Are there any questions you would like for me to ask our guests? This is your podcast, so I welcome your feedback. My original plan was to publish 3 podcasts on day 1 of the podcast. Then I publish 1 podcast a week. However, I currently have 35 people who have expressed interest in being on the Cavness HR podcast. Because of this, I'm going to be a bit more aggressive with initial postings of the podcast. I'm now going to post 3 on day 1 to include this one, and post 1 a day for the following 8 days. I plan on posting the first one on October 2nd, and then on Mondays, once a week following that, but that is subject to change. After about 2 months, I will relook the posting schedule to see if it should stay the same or increase. For the actual way the podcast will be done, I'm doing the podcast interviews on Zoom. Then from Zoom, I'm uploading the Zoom to the YouTube. Then I'm sending the YouTube video to a person on Fiverr who will transcribe the video for me. And I use that transcription to help me do the show notes and the blog. And I'll post that on my blog, the cavnesshr.silverback blog. And then the YouTube video will be posted on the Cavness HR podcast channel, which is my YouTube channel, one of my YouTube channels. And then as a podcast, we post it on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And I would ask all of you to help share this content to get it out to as many people as possible. Also, I'm going to ask you that you go to YouTube. I'm also going to ask that you go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review the Cavness HR podcast. As this will have to bring in more listeners. The more listeners we have, the more value we can deliver. Before I close, I want to thank John Lee Dumas and Kate Erickson, everyone from Podcasters Paradise, for all the help in getting this podcast off the ground. The links to their websites will be in the show notes. Finally, I want to thank you, the listener, for giving me your time. I am truly appreciative. Be great every day.